Hey everybody, it's Greg here again. So if you have an LG dryer or really any dryer and it's making this sound, I'll show you how to fix it. Sounds like it's about to rattle itself to death. So yeah, I'll take it apart and I'll show you what's going on. Okay, so to start ripping this guy apart, there's going to be a couple screws on the back that will let you slide the top back. So we'll go loosen those now and get this started. So before we start anything, we always unplug it. So unplug it from the wall, and then we can start ripping things apart. So there's a couple screws, and they're underneath this lip. I believe there's 3 of them. If you undo these ones, you can't slide this back because this part is just a bracket. So you actually need to undo the bracket from the machine. So there'll be 3 screws, 3 or 4 underneath here. Okay, so put your screws aside, make sure you don't lose them. This whole top will just slide back. Okay, so yeah, if you just push back on this top, and sometimes it is sticky, so you do have to kind of ram it a little bit. And there's a point that it will be able to come up. You just have to find that point. It's not pushed all the way back, so it kind of makes it a little tougher to figure it out. So initially looking in here, there's something kind of funny. This is the cover for the electrical that comes into the back. That was just sitting on the drum. So that's probably what was causing that sound. I'll test it again. I want to clean out the dryer, so I'm going to be taking it apart anyway, but something as silly as this can cause issues. So with the top even off, just keep my hands free of everything. I'm going to plug it in and try testing it again, see what it does. So yeah, that plug more or less covers all the electrical and keeps it out of the way of the drum. It's still out of the way right now, so we don't have to worry about it hitting the drum or anything like that. So just do a time dry. Something as easy as that was what caused that sound. So we'll have to find some screws, reattach that thing, and then I still want to take it apart. It's got a little bit of a wobbling kind of sound. That's usually something to do with the rollers, but we'll see when we get in there. We'll rip it all apart and get to all the insides, clean out everything, and then we can put it back together and know that we will have a good dryer. Okay, so I got that cover back on. I just found a couple screws to put in there. So it goes like that, sits underneath the wiring, and just, yeah, like I said, more or less keeps the wiring from hitting the drum. So everything is good there now, but we still want to rip it apart and give it a good clean inside. If I'm going to be selling this guy, I want it to be all cleaned up and make sure all the rollers are good, all the idlers are good, and yeah, everything runs smooth. So we'll start ripping it apart. Okay, so I thought we could speed things up just a little bit, just to make the video so it's not too boring. So there's 2 screws on the top holding this console part on. We'll take those off. Everything's gonna have to come off the console, the front, everything in the front that you see. So there's another screw on the back of the console that's holding the console to this bracket that's back here. And you can take those out. The only thing wrong with using the drill is everything's so tight in here and it tends to undo the chuck. So pulling this out can be kind of a pain in the butt. So there's little tabs on the top of this plastic console piece that you got to kind of pry a little bit off of the metal part here. Maybe I'll take you guys back here and show you what's going on. Okay, so this is the back of the console piece here. So it's hard to see, but there's these little tabs along this front edge. There's also the board is connected to this front piece. So when you pull this forward, the board doesn't fit well out the front. Also, you have a bunch of wiring that's going to have to be undone just to get that board out. Sometimes you can undo the clip here and move the wiring out of the way, but sometimes you just have to wiggle stuff out. So that wasn't too bad at all. So instead of undoing everything, I don't necessarily like undoing electrical from a board all the time, because it's every time you undo it, the tabs get a little weaker, and I don't want there to be an issue with one of the connections to the board after I've sold the thing. So I just put it up top here. I got to take this piece off, and we're going to move this whole thing all the way back there so it won't be in the way at all. Okay, so to remove this bracket, which you have to do in order to take this off, there's a couple screws on it, but we have to take this piece off first, and then the bracket will come off. But we can't take that bracket off until we get this front door piece off. So there's 3 screws holding this guy on, and then there'll be 2 screws. If you open up the door, there's a screw here and a screw here. Those are the only ones we need to undo. So watch, if you have all the screws taken out, at this point the panel can potentially fall forward, so just watch in case it decides it's going to do that. So there's little tabs. I didn't get that guy yet. So there's little tabs right here that hold this panel on. So you just push kind of down on the panel and get it past that little tab. So there's a wiring right here that's connected to the door switch. You just pull that back and that comes off. And then there's little tabs that the front panel here sits on. So you just lift up the panel and it's off. So we'll put that aside for now. We need to clean the back of that a little bit. But now you can take this other screw off for this console piece here, and it just lifts up and out. So now this whole thing can be moved as one, but we got to unhook it from these little clips. So we're going to have to take the drum out eventually. So at some point, we'll have to move this whole thing, but unhook the light if you have a light right there. And then this whole thing can sit across here, and you can take everything out now and not worry about this falling off. Don't, I guess, bump it around too much or else it will fall off, but it can't go far. It's just you'll pull on these electrical connections. You don't really want to do that. So, taking off this front panel, there's 4 screws there. Sometimes there'll be 1 screw down on this heater housing, but there isn't on this one. And there's 1 electrical connector on this side right there. So we'll undo that, take those 4 screws off. This whole piece will come off. I'll move this back just a little bit so you can see what I'm doing. And yeah, let's get that going. Okay, so once you have everything disconnected, these are little clips that they sit in these little catches. So we just lift up on one side. That will take this off. Now the rollers are right here and here. They're still going to be hooked under the dryer. So, or sorry, under the drum. So the whole panel usually doesn't just come off easily. You got to lift up on this other side too to get it out of the little holes that it sits in, and pull it down to get those rollers off of the drum, because they really hold on to the drum. So yeah, there's the 2 front rollers on that panel there. Now we can actually take the drum out. The belt, it's a really tight spot. I'll try to get the camera into the side here so I can see how to take it off. Okay, so hopefully you guys can see that all right. You're kind of looking through the side back of the machine, and my hands are probably going to get in the way a little bit, but at least you can kind of see what I'm doing. So you have to do it from the front. And you just put your hands under the drum. You can feel the belt. It wraps around this idler here and then around the motor. So this idler is a tensioner. So if you pull back on that tensioner, you can make the belt loose, basically. So you can pull that belt off and pull it off the motor. So to put it back on, you put it onto the motor and then pull that idler back as far as you can, and then hook it onto the idler, just like that. So we'll take that off, and don't just let the idler fall down. There's an actual switch connected to it, and you don't want to break that switch. So once you get that out, then the whole drum can just be pulled out. The belt will probably catch on everything, so just pull the belt out with it, or pull the drum out and work the belt off of it. Whatever you have to do to pull out that whole drum. Okay, so this is the dryer without the drum in it. As you can see, there is a lot of built up lint in here, and you can tell from the color of it, this has been burning. Not quite on fire, but burning. So this dryer really wasn't that far away from catching on fire, which is really scary. It's so important to have these things cleaned out. I would say, depending on usage, but I would say probably once a year. Once every 2 years, maybe. Depends. Some venting systems are really good at getting the air out and the lint out. And I could take apart a machine that's been there for 6 years, and it has almost nothing in it for lint. And I could take apart a machine that's been there for 6 months, and it's a huge blanket. So depends how your venting is in your house, but for the most part, I would say a year after owning your dryer, it'd be nice to take it apart and just see how your venting is working, first of all, and just clean things up. You wouldn't have to, at that point, well, you shouldn't have to anyway, be replacing anything really, but so the 2 rollers, these guys right here, that's as much as they're rolling. That's that's not good. It should, you should be able to spin that, and it spin for at least about 10 seconds. Some will just keep going and going and going, and the bearings are really good in those ones. But the big problem is all this lint and hair and whatever else builds up on that shaft. And because the shafts the rollers are constantly turning, it sucks all the hair and the whatever else into the little bearing that's on these guys, in between the bearing and the shaft. And that will slow these down like crazy. Eventually, the hair and whatever else is in there heats up and can actually start to cut the metal of this shaft. And that's when you start getting rollers falling right off and things like that. This isn't obviously to that point. They've just started to get to the point where they're starting to seize up. So really, it wouldn't have been too long, I guess, until there was huge issues with those too. And if you let it get to this point, usually you can take those rollers off, clean up the shafts, clean all the hair and whatever out of there, take a rag and wipe off whatever kind of greasy stuff they have on the shafts, and you can put it back together and it runs great. So we'll take those two rollers off. There's just these little triangle clips. If you've watched any of my other videos, you've probably watched me take those off, but I do it with a 90-degree pick. I just find it works best. Don't get your hands in the way though. This thing is really good at stabbing into you. So it's tough to really show you because I kind of have to crawl right in here. I'll move you a little bit over here, and just gonna pick some of this off so I can even see where the clip is. So if you just get it on one side of the clip and pry it out a little bit, then you can usually work it around and the clip will just come right off. Don't lose that little clip. If you break this, you can buy them at just any appliance parts store. Yeah, they're just roller retainers, I think is what they're called. So just put that aside for now because they do get brittle. They're just plastic. A lot of the time you won't be able to pull this off because of all the hair that's on there. So you got to pull that off. You can use a pick or a knife or something to get that off there. Sometimes you can use a pair of pliers just to grab it and pull a lot of that stuff off there because it's gross is what it is. I don't know why when hair isn't on our heads anymore it gets gross, but it is. So we can get that off there now, get any other remaining crap out of there. And what I like to do is usually I use paper towel, but I didn't have any on me right now, so I'm just going to use this rag, which works just fine. I just kind of jam it into the hole there till it comes out the other side. Pull it out a little bit, and then give that roller a spin. That'll get any of the stuff that's worked its way into this bearing piece out of there. So now the shaft, we want to get all this stuff off of here too, because this just holds in the heat from the bearing. So there's another clip back here. I know you can't really even see it yet, but there's another one back here. You can take it off if there's a bunch of stuff built up behind it. I don't really like taking that one off because you have to get it out of its clip spot there, and then you have to get it out of the clip spot here once you get it up to the front. So it's kind of a pain in the butt. If you don't have to pull it off, don't bother. But yeah, I will. I'm going to grab the vacuum, clean all this scrap out. I'll take off the other roller and clean up the shaft on that guy. And then I'll bring you guys back in and you can see how we put it back together. Okay, so I'm back and a little out of breath. So we got it all vacuumed out, got the shafts all cleaned off. Cleaning inside the The actual roller is good, but you also want to use the rag on the shafts just to make sure that there's no nothing sticky, or sometimes the little lube that they use from the factory can almost turn gummy, and we don't want that. So make sure when you take them off, you watch which side you took it off of, because sometimes they can kind of cut their own different kind of groove, and it's better. So you see how this guy spins now? That is nice, but this guy is not really spinning at all. So what I do with those is, it's got some gummy stuff built up on there, but it doesn't want to wipe off. So I just use a little bit of very light sandpaper and rough that shaft up a little bit. Just get some of that stuff off there. And you'll see, once we get that off there, always give it a wipe after too. We don't want all the metal filings and stuff on into the roller. You'll see a big difference once you get all that gummy stuff off there. So that is a pain in the butt. So that roller, when you roll it fairly nicely, it doesn't make any sound at all, but it's got a little bit of play in it. So when you spin it fast, it tends to jump. It's never going to spin that fast. Plus it's going to have weight on it, so you're not going to hear that sound. If you want, you can take that off again, maybe sand it just a hair more, see if there's any high spots or rough spots on the shaft. If there is, sand them off a little bit. Don't take too much off, of course, because it's the more gap you have, the worse things get. If you just can't get it so it actually sounds nice, like this guy here, you might have to actually replace the shaft and the roller with it. But this guy's going to be fine. I know he's going to be good. So another thing you want to check is this roller, because it's got the same kind of thing, and it's rolling really nice. So there was no heating issues or anything, so I'm not going to bother testing that stuff. I do have another video on testing all these components and the heater on an LG and a Samsung dryer. So maybe I'll throw those in the comment there. But other than that, we can now throw the drum back on and throw the belt on and put everything back together. So I will go grab that drum and put it on. You guys already know how to put the belt on, so I'm not going to bother getting close-ups of that again. But yeah, we'll see you when this drum's back in. Okay, so we got that drum back in there. So what I always do after I put the drum in, just to make sure that the belt isn't going to fall off or anything like that, I pick up, kind of get the drum to sit where it's naturally sits when everything's all together, and just turn it to make sure everything seats right. And I always turn it clockwise, but yeah, it's better if you just turn it clockwise. So once you turn it 3-4 times, the belt's not likely to fall off when you put everything back together and start it up. So we can put that front panel on, but the front panel has its own rollers. And these ones are, that one's not so bad. This one needs to be cleaned too. So I'm going to take those off, clean that, clean out all this. Yeah, then we'll throw this back on. Okay, both of those guys are all cleaned up and rolling nicely, but I wanted to kind of let you know of something else you can do while this is all together, or all apart. So you can take this guy off, or you can just stick one of those cleaner tubes you can get from any hardware store or appliance store that's made for dryers. There's a couple screws just on the outside, and it's, if yours isn't an LG dryer, the screws can be in a different spot, but for the most part, this is where they put them. This has got a bunch of lint in and around where the screws are, so just got to kind of pick that lint out of there. There is these sensor bars here, which you can clean those too. If you're type of household that uses downy sheets or some kind of sheet in the dryer, they're not great to use, but they can coat these sensors here. And when you use sensor dry, that's what the clothes swipe against to tell the machine that the clothes are dry. If you get coatings on here, it can't read them properly and everything kind of screws up. So you take these screws out. Just watch, because the wiring to those sensors, sometimes they make it really short because they just don't want you to take it apart, I guess. But yeah, so you take those off. Then we can take off these guys here. Now this one, I believe, is the screw that take off to change these sensors. So I don't think we have to take those off. It's been a while since I pulled one of these guys out. And everything's going to be stuck and a little bit tough to get out of there. You got to kind of wiggle it out. We might have to actually loosen this other screw. Oh, maybe not. So what makes it tough is this big panel on here that has to kind of weasel out of where it sits. So you can tell this has got quite a bit of stuff in there. So we want to get all that out of there, because that just doesn't need to be in there. That'll also affect how the filter sits. If all this stuff is in there, the filter won't sit properly. And if the filter is not sitting properly, things can get past the filter down into the blower and cause a lot of issues. So you can take apart this guy, and really you could sit here for hours and pick out all these little holes that are on here. You can use a vacuum from the front side and push the lint forward to get all that out of there. It's one of those jobs. If you like monotony, there it is. But anyway, I'll clean this all out and we can put this back together. So putting it back together was just exactly the opposite as taking it out. You got to just push this back into the hole here and kind of wiggle it in. The wiring for these sensors is actually over here, so make sure you don't disconnect those wires, or make sure they didn't disconnect when you first pulled it apart. Just make sure they're still on. And yeah, we can clean this out and put it back together. Okay, so I got that all back together and cleaned out. I got fuzz everywhere. So yeah, this is what I can't even actually grab it all with one hand, but that's all what I cleaned out of just this blower piece here, the filter area. So yeah, it'll definitely help the dryer run a little better, not having all that stuff in there. So what I do is I hook this piece kind of under the drum and push the whole thing up so I can hook on these pieces here. I don't put any screws in yet, but I always hook up my wiring now because I don't want to forget about that. The dryer doesn't run or doesn't like running without everything hooked up. So we still got to hook in these bottom ones. So I'll kind of show you a trick for that. So if you push in a little bit on the bottom and turn the drum while you're doing it, the rollers in the front here will get sucked under the drum where they're supposed to sit. So now it's basically in the spot it's supposed to be in. So you can lift these up and get them to sit in there properly, and everything's in there where it should go. So just those 4 screws, make sure your wiring's hooked up. When you're taking all your screws off, but for a lot of the part, the screws are generally the same. But if you want to keep them separate as to which ones came from where, it would probably be a good idea. It's not going to hurt anyway. So yeah, so you just these 4 screws, and then we have to put the bracket, this piece, back on. Okay, so I got you a little higher there so you can see a little better, but this whole thing got turned around. You want these little tab pieces to be on the back of this panel. What you really want to make sure is that this little piece that holds that front panel from falling forward that I showed you earlier is in the front and on this side. So the wiring, this is where the wiring becomes a pain. It's always in the way and never long enough. So there's little tabs that need this panel to sit into also. So you got to make sure those little tabs are on the back so they hook in. I'll put a couple screws into that. If you're not sure where the screws came out of, you can usually see a little bit of a wear ring around where a screw was. So at least you know that there was a screw there. So you can put one in there, and for the most part, you should be right. If not, and you go to put everything else back together and nothing seems to be going together right, well, you can always move the screw to a different hole if you put it in the wrong one or whatever. So there was 2 screws that came through the top of this bracket. So we put those back on. Now we're going to put that front panel back on. It has to go on before this console because the console actually sits in little tabs on top of this bracket, or on top of the door here. So panel, we're going to just hook it little bit of fluff in there. Hook it back onto these little tabs on the bottom here. Put it up. Before we get it all the way in, we reconnect this door switch and put this back under that tab. At least it'll hold it for a sec until we get everything kind of in place. Remember, there was 3 screws that held this guy on. So 2 on this side, 1 on the other. And there was 2 screws in the front here. On some machines, they are special looking screws that actually have a big washer on them. On these guys, it's not the case. So it's just, looks like the same screws you took off from everywhere else. Put those 2 screws in. Close the door. So put this console back into place. You'll see where the wires need to sit in these little retainers. So try to put them back into those retainers because it definitely helps keep everything out of the way of the drum. That's the biggest thing we're trying to avoid here. Okay, so what happens is the board doesn't like to sneak past this this little bracket here. So you got to put it in fairly gently, and you just kind of wiggle it a little bit, watching all your wires so you don't end up catching one of your wires on a metal piece and ripping it or something like that. Sometimes it comes out so nicely and won't go back in. Sometimes you just kind of have to wiggle it around. It'll go in. So that's pretty much in there. So you just push all these clips back on to the back part of this console, and then we need a couple screws there to hold the console on. If you're fairly good with a drill, you can use a drill here, but remember, you're just screwing into plastic, so don't ram it too much. So make sure that the front is actually all in its little clip spots, and then the back is all the wiring's all hooked up again and stuff like that. That's all in place. So what we got left is to put the top back on. Yeah, that's it. So maybe I'll show you guys from back here this time how I put these tops back on. Make sure the wiring is not too high. It's got quite a big piece in here that the wiring can kind of sit in, but we don't want it rubbing. So you put it back down and it'll hit these little tabs right about here, and then we can start to slide it forward. Sometimes you get lucky and it goes on really easy like that. Sometimes you gotta fight and wiggle it a little bit, and you get it, but it's not the easiest thing. So a couple screws into the back here, and we're done. Okay, so we're just going to we plugged it in. I've put the screws back in the top so we can turn it on. I like to just turn it on time dry. It's a full hot cycle, and it won't shut off on me while I'm testing. So we'll let that start. That sounds amazing. If you start getting squeaks or anything like that, let it run a little bit. Sometimes when you move everything around, it will not sit in its spot that it has been in forever, and it takes a minute for it to get back into that point. So I'll let it run for a bit and we'll see how it's doing. Okay, so everything's sounding good now. I ran it for about 20 minutes or so, and all those noises, the little squeaks and stuff, disappeared, so we're good. But in order to actually properly test it, I'm going to have to run a couple of loads actually through it before I sell anything. I always make sure that it's going to be 100% because I don't want it coming back. But yeah, if your dryer, especially LG, is making any kind of squeaking, any kind of sounds like we were getting right off the bat, that is how you do pretty much everything that has to do with squeaking. So those rollers, the idler, anything that is out of place, like that little cup here that caught the wiring, keeps it away from the drum. That is something you can't possibly diagnose that without taking it apart at least a little bit. So that's how you do it. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you get your dryer fixed.